Is Syracuse a contender in the ACC right now?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on this week's Poll Friday, I asked you guys the question, is Syracuse football right now a contender in the ACC? And, well, I asked this question because Syracuse is coming off a ranked win on the road against UNLV last week. The Orange are now 4-1 and 1-1 in the conference, and Syracuse takes on NC State this Saturday. That is tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern in Raleigh. Another road test for Syracuse coming up. The results are in on whether or not Syracuse is a contender in the ACC or not. 309 total votes this week, and 67% of you guys said yes, the Orange are contenders in the ACC. But on this channel, I'm going to tell you what I honestly feel, and I disagree with you guys. I do not think at this very moment on October 11, 2024 at 12:38 p.m. when I am recording this, that Syracuse is a contender in the ACC. That's not to say that they can't be a contender in the ACC, but right now, I need to see more from this team. And it's possible I'd be feeling differently had they beaten Stanford early on in the season, but they didn't. We have to take the results for what they are. They are in a good position, just not yet a contender. Here's what Syracuse needs to do to become a contender in the ACC, at least in my opinion. First of all, they got to beat NC State. Right? If they don't beat NC State on Saturday, that's now 2 conference losses. They would have a razor-thin margin for error to contend in the ACC if they're even lucky enough for that. I mean, even if they were to run the table, go 6-2 in the ACC, it might not be enough to get to the conference championship game. They might have to just go 7-1. They just have to win. I don't care if they look pretty. I don't care if they look ugly. They just have to find a way to get it done. They are favored on the road against NC State tomorrow. Now, let's say Syracuse does do what they're supposed to do and they beat NC State, and I think they will. I predict that Syracuse will beat NC State, okay? Well, then you got Pitt on the road, and that is a good test for this team. It's going to be coming off a bye week, just like the Stanford game, but also just like the Stanford game. Pitt will also be coming off a bye. That game is on a Thursday night, all right? That is the game in my mind right now that if Syracuse were to win that one as well and get to 6-1, then we can really have the conversation as to whether or not this team is a contender, because Pitt looks a lot better than many of us thought in the preseason. Certainly better than what they were last year. They already have more wins than they had last year. Right? That game is a lot tougher than we thought in the preseason. On the road should be a good test for Syracuse in that one. This is also going to be some housekeeping, but also weaving in tidbits, right? I want to see how Syracuse responds to the recent slate of injuries that they have been dealt. It hasn't been very good. Washington transfer Will Nixon, he is out for the season with a Liz Frank injury. There were a couple injuries on the defensive line. Dion Wilson and Kevin Jobity are likely out for the season as well, according to head coach Fran Brown. So that's a massive hit to the defensive line for this team. And so I would expect more Murad Watson, Rashad Perry, Isaiah Hastings, and so many more players on that D line. There is positive news on the injury front, which is that Marlowe Wax, I don't think he's going to be back for NC State this week, but is trending in the right direction for the Pitt game. It's a good thing that the bye week came at this very moment for Marlowe Wax. Overall, Syracuse has to respond to those injuries as well, right? Their defensive line was already not really necessarily the strength of the team. Now it's even weaker. How will they respond? If they respond well, maybe they are contenders. But if not, it is what it is. It happens, right? The mark of a great team sometimes is when your players go down, can your replacements do an adequate job of replacing them? That is the deal. Every team deals with injuries. Every single team. Think about Texas right now. Quinn Ewers, he's been out for a while. Arch Manning stepped right in, and they haven't skipped a beat, right? Every team has injuries. It's about how you're able to overcome those injuries. So Syracuse right now, in my opinion, is not necessarily a contender yet, but hey, maybe they could be down the line if they beat NC State and they beat Pitt. Now, coming up, we'll give an overall outlook on the conference and where Syracuse sits in it. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing access to affordable sexual health treatments, all from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments such as chewable hard mints, proven treatments like Viagra and Cialis, or their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is simple and 100% online. No uncomfortable doctor visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed. Pay one low price for your treatments, online visits, ongoing shipments, and provider messaging. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers. So if ED is getting you down, it's time you find the option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And Syracuse is now just a 3.5-point favorite against NC State on Saturday night. So the line has moved by a full point towards the Wolfpack, and Cuse's money line has also gone down from -194 to -162. So there's better value right there. If you like those odds in either direction, you can check it right now out on FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. Here's what the ACC looks like right now and where Syracuse falls in it. I think there are clearly two teams that have separated themselves from the pack, and that is Clemson and Miami. Those two teams in my mind are the best two teams in the ACC right now, but both have looked vulnerable at times. Clemson, of course, that first game of the season against Georgia looked terrible, but they have basically done everything since then to respond. They have looked dominant since then, but still, that's kind of on the back of your mind when thinking about Clemson and how they looked against Georgia, albeit that was the #1 team in the country at the time. Then there's Miami, who it's almost the exact opposite of Clemson, right? They are still one of the top two teams in the ACC. They had this tremendous start going down in the swamp and absolutely destroying Florida, which I know Florida is not very good, but still, Florida had won like every home opener since the 80s. Before Miami came into town. So that is no small feat that Miami accomplished. And they looked like they were just going to boat race their way through the ACC. And then you see the last two games that happened. Almost losing to Virginia Tech, right? Almost losing to Cal. All of a sudden, Miami looks a little bit more vulnerable, albeit they're still undefeated, but they look a little bit more vulnerable than they have in the past. And for Syracuse fans that are watching or listening to this channel, these two teams play in the final game of the regular season, and a game that at one point I thought was pretty much unwinnable for Syracuse. They would need a miracle. Now, all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I think there is a path to beating Miami. Not saying that they will beat Miami, but there is a path. I think the gap between Miami, Clemson, and everyone else is not super duper significant in the ACC, but those are still the best two teams in my mind. Then there's another group of two teams. There's another tier, and that is SMU and Pitt. These two teams have looked pretty good at the start of the season, but it's one of those things where do you really trust them? Do you really buy them to be ACC contenders? I am not entirely sure, and we'll find out when Syracuse plays Pitt in just a couple of weeks. Then there is a group, and this is where Syracuse falls in, of a bunch of teams in the ACC that could emerge, could fall flat on their face, or they just downright stare you, but they really have no shot of contending anyway, and that is a la Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, one of those teams that stares you, but they can't actually contend with their schedule. I would say Syracuse, like I mentioned, is in that tier of a bunch of ACC teams with their record, with how they've looked. You could see them becoming a contender at some point, right? Syracuse could easily win the next 2-3 games, and all of a sudden we're looking at them entirely differently. Or, they fall flat on their face against NC State, then they get blown out at Pitt. Now all of a sudden they're 4-3, they're done with ACC contention, right? I don't think that extreme is going to happen. But I would put Syracuse in the tier of it could go either way. We need to see more data from this team and those other teams. So that's where Syracuse right now, in my mind, is in the ACC. And leave a comment in the comment section below. Is Syracuse a contender in the conference? Where does Syracuse, in your mind, fall within the conference, right? Are they on the same tier as Clemson and Miami? I don't think so, but maybe you do. Are they in that next tier with SMU and Pitt? Leave a comment below where you think Syracuse stands in the ACC and whether or not they are a contender. So that about does it for this week's edition of Poll Friday. A reminder to vote for Poll Fridays. I will post the question on Monday afternoon on Twitter, which is at @LO_Syracuse, and on YouTube, the Locked On Syracuse YouTube channel page in the community section. And you'll have about 3-4 days to vote on the question that I propose. All right. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And let's hope that Syracuse can take care of business against NC State tomorrow.